everybody, and welcome to this special on the super full Hunter's Moon in Pisces on the 7th of October at 4:48 PM GMT. So yeah, and now I'm going to talk about, this current full moon and how it's influencing us. So yeah. Okay, so this is the super full moon and it's also the Hunter's Moon. So the term supermoon in astrology refers to a full moon that appears larger and brighter than usual in the sky, and this is because the moon is at its closest point to Earth in its orbit. The supermoon is also known as perigee, and the combination of the moon's proximity, closeness to Earth, and the alignment of the Sun, Earth and Moon creates the illusion of a larger and more radiant full moon. So the term supermoon was coined by astrologer Richard Noel in 1979, and astrologically supermoons have increased effects on emotions, tides and spiritual energies due to their increased gravitational pull that the full moon being closer to us has at this time, and this can lead to a bigger influence on human emotions and behaviour due to the moon's closer alignment with the Earth. So yeah, so this is the super full Hunter's Moon in Pisces. The energetic frequency is water, element, mystical communion, intuitive harvest and emotional endings, right? And it's happening in the 20th degree of Pisces, and we have the moon making a semi-square to Uranus, quintile to Pluto, the sun making a sextile square to Uranus and a trine to the midheaven. So I'm going to talk more about the aspects involved later on. And the Sabian symbol is a table set for evening meal, and the moon enters Aries on the same day at 8:58 PM. So I'm going to talk about that, and we also have a lot of planets in retrograde as well. And the 20th degree of Pisces rules the right fibular muscle in the human body. So in terms of what this full moon, Hunter's Moon, activates, it's a release gateway for completing emotional cycles and harvesting, reaping the rewards of spiritual wisdom. So now I'm going to talk about the full Hunter's Moon, origins, energies and uses. So traditionally the Hunter's Moon follows the harvest moon, starting and marking the time when our ancestors would hunt and preserve, gather meat for winter survival, right? It's named for the clear, bright moonlight that allowed hunters to track their prey through the night. So positively, it allows us to have deep, intuitive clarity for tracking what truly nurtures our soul, increases our ability to hunt down solutions to long-standing emotional problems. It's a powerful energy for gathering and preserving spiritual wisdom. It's perfect timing for completing projects that feed our deepest needs, but negatively, there can be a tendency to become emotionally predatory or possessive, a risk of spiritual bypassing instead of doing the real work, the inner work that needs to be done. We can get lost in fantasy rather than practical action, and the overwhelming psychic sensitivity can cloud our clear judgment right now. So the best use of the Hunter's Moon energy is to do release ceremonies for outdated emotional patterns, forgiveness rituals that free up creative energy, meditation practices that connect to our ancestral wisdom, creative expression that channels divine inspiration, and healing work that confronts generational trauma. So yeah, the super full moon in Pisces is like having a proper astrological dinner party where all our emotions, dreams and spiritual insights have been invited to the table. The Sabian symbol, a table set for an evening meal, couldn't be more perfect. It's about preparation, nurturement and the sacred act of gathering together everything that feeds your soul. But mind you, it's not a typical dinner party, with Pisces energy intensifying, the supermoon's intensity. We're talking about a meal that might include courses of liquid starlight, conversations with spirit guides, and perhaps a side of prophetic dreams for pudding. So the challenge here is, us being able to stay grounded enough to actually show up to our own spiritual feast, harvest, instead of floating off into another world, into the ether, but the beautiful thing about this particular super full Hunter's Moon is how it bridges the mystical with the practical, and we're being asked to harvest the wisdom from our emotional and spiritual journey this year, then actually use it to nurture ourselves and others as we move forward into the last few months of this year and into the new year, right? And it's not just enough to have deep realizations. You need to set the table and invite them to dinner, so to speak. So inviting physically other people or your emotions to do that inner work, to be open to the shadow work and not spiritual bypass, ignore your feelings, which Pisces energy can always make us do because it's ruled by Neptune, and Neptune can always make us want to escape into whether it's too much Netflix and chilling or indulging in drugs and alcohol, and stuff like that. So in terms of the lunar energies involved in the super full Hunter's Moon in Pisces, we have the Sun in Libra, and this brings balance, energy that wants us to be more fair and see beauty in all relationships, creating a gentle backdrop for this emotionally intense full moon. And the moon in Pisces intensifies our intuition, dreams and spiritual sensitivity. So this makes it a good time for releasing what no longer serves your soul's evolution, growth. And with multiple planets in retrograde, as I said, Saturn, Neptune, Chiron, Pluto and Uranus, there's a powerful backwards pull that's asking you to complete unfinished emotional business before moving forward. And this combination creates a perfect storm for deep spiritual release work, because we've got the Libra energy wanting us to be fair, to see all sides, to cooperate, but just make sure you don't people please too much, right, and assert your boundaries and respect other people's boundaries. But Libra's energy helps us to see all situations clearly, and the Piscean intuition shows us what needs to go, what we need to let go of, and the retrograde energy gives us the astrological rewind button to finish what we started already, to do it, to finish things properly. So, to make sure that we end things. Like, you may want to end a toxic relationship, and sometimes you just need to run from those things, right? But it also puts the spotlight on proper endings, but sometimes we can't get the closure we seek, so all we can do is end things abruptly, right? So now I'm going to talk about the aspects that's involved in this super full Hunter's Moon in Pisces. So as I said, we've got the moon making a semi-square to Uranus, and this is 1.55 applying energy. So this can bring unexpected emotional truths and revelations that may feel like lightning bolts to our psyche, our soul, It gives us sudden breakthroughs and liberation from old emotional patterns. So good for that shadow work, inner child work, right? But negatively, it can make us more emotionally unstable and resistant to change that needs to happen. So we should use this energy for freedom rituals and releasing, inflexible expectations about how our spiritual growth should look. And we've got the moon making a quintile to Pluto, and this is separating, but it adds to us being able to, reset things, to heal emotionally. It's really transformative, and it's quintile energy. So this means it's working from the inside, so giving us that creative power from the inside out to transform pain into wisdom. Also gives us access to deep healing abilities, but the challenge comes when, the intense emotional purging that can happen, the emotional cleansing can feel overwhelming. So as I said, it's perfect for that Saturn work and releasing generational trauma through creative expression. So drawing, singing, designing, whatever it is that you do to be creative, you know. The Sun also makes a sextile square to Uranus. So again, you know, it's another call from our conscious self to break free from limiting beliefs about our identity and purpose. It supports our authentic self-expression and innovative approaches to personal growth, but it also adds to the disruption to our sense of self and stability and identity that can happen. So it's best to use this energy for releasing outdated versions of yourself and being more open to growing in all areas you need to grow. We've got the Sun making a trine to the midheaven. This is separating. So again, this aligns us with our authentic self, allowing us to, you know, get on our life purpose and path and do our highest calling. It allows us to integrate our spiritual insights into practical life and into our career. So it's really good to help us to do work around manifesting our life purpose and releasing fears about stepping into our full potential and being who we truly are and being the main character of our stories, you know. So now I'm going to talk about the Sabian symbols that are involved in this full moon, right? And as I said, we've got the moon in the 20th degrees of Pisces. The Sabian symbol is a table set for evening meal. It rules the right fibula muscle, and the theme of this one is where dreams literally meet dinner and our leg muscles remember how to stand in spiritual truth. So it's all about emotional and spiritual completion and nurturing and sacred preparation, conscious nourishment of our emotional, spiritual and psychological needs, and a gathering together what feeds our souls. So doing the things that we need to do. And yes, sometimes, you know, it can be hard to face emotions. This is why we spend so much time blocking them out with drugs, alcohol, self-destructive habits or relationships, right? But this wants us to tap into the things that feed us positively, and it brings the archetype of the nurturing host who creates space for, you know, cooperation, communion, togetherness and emotional feeding, you know. So it wants us to complete emotional cycles and prepare for spiritual nourishment and growth. It can make us ready to share wisdom, lessons learned from our past spiritual growth or lack of it with others, and it can just make us be more nice and empathetic towards meeting our own needs in a healthy way. Negatively, we can be overly focused on preparation without taking action, being too focused on spiritual materialism, like, oh, look at my tarot cards and I can levitate, or look at my crystals, without actually the practicalities of the spiritual shadow work and inner work that needs to be done. We can also feed others while starve ourselves, so people pleasing with a deliberate influence, right? Or we can just do rituals without genuine connection, you know, just praying or saying affirmations without actually feeling them, you know. So it wants us to gather the rewards, the fruits of our emotional work, and create a sacred space for integration of our psychological, emotional and spiritual needs, and think about how we can meet them as well in healthy ways. On the esoteric, occult, hidden meaning level, the sacred communion table where earthly and divine energies meet, preparation for spiritual awareness, creating altars for manifestation. Negatively, we can be spiritually gluttonous, you know, just wanting more and more and more and more spirituality, you know, buying spiritual things, t-shirt, the tarot cards, the incense and all of that, performing spiritual rituals for ego rather than connection or for likes, and using sacred practices to avoid real intimacy. So in terms of the lunar magic application, the best thing to do on the esoteric level, create an actual dinner ceremony for releasing and integrating, using food as a sacrament in your full moon rituals. In terms of how this degree influences our health on the emotional level, it reminds us that it's time to nurture our emotional body with genuine care rather than spiritual bypassing or emotional overeating. Spiritually, it's perfect for communion practices, prayer work, and creating sacred spaces for divine connection and guidance. Physically, it wants us to focus on digestive health, conscious eating, and how we literally nurture our body during times of spiritual intensity. Psychologically, it wants us to integrate spiritual insights into our daily life, confronting patterns around nurturing and being nurtured. Thinking in the ways that you don't receive affection, why that may be, and where you may over nurture others and not nurture yourself. So rituals where you create a sacred dinner ceremony where each course represents something you're releasing are good. Using the table as an altar space in terms of well-being strategies, conscious meal preparation as meditation, eating in silence to honor the full moon energy and serving meals with the spiritual community. In terms of looking after your body, stretching and massage for your right fibular muscle, walking meditation to ground the Piscean energy through your legs, as this muscle helps you stand steady while your Piscean intuition flows. So strengthen it to stay grounded during spiritual experiences, or just to stay healthy in life in general. So Uranus is in the 7th degree of Taurus, and the Sabin symbology is a woman of Sumeria comes to draw water from the well. These rules are vocal cords, and it's where revolution, life changes, can meet ace and wisdom, and our voice learns to speak what the ancestors knew. So a woman of Sumeria comes to draw water from the well, can bring changes to how we access deep wisdom and spiritual nourishment. We can draw from ancient sources of wisdom, whether it be looking at family photo or researching family history or having dreams, accessing what has always been available, and it gives the outsider who knows hidden truths energy. So it gives the archetype of the wise woman or person who goes to the source regardless of social convention, regardless of what people are doing. It's about following your own path and learning to manage your emotional, psychological, physical and emotional needs, so you can do so, and so you can remove all barriers that stop you from believing in yourself and your own path and your own truths. So it can make us take revolutionary approaches to how we nurture ourselves spiritually, and gives us breakthrough insights from unexpected sources. Negatively, we can be an outcast for our wisdom right now. We can draw from poison well to listening to fake spiritual teachers or misinterpreting messages as well. So a lot of the time it can be seen as an outcast for not following others, but there comes a time in everyone's life when they have to stand up for what they believe in. Also, there's a risk of change, destroying foundations and routines and blueprints that are necessary. So just think about letting go of relationships or a career. Sometimes we can have these moments where, I'm just going to destroy everything. And for some of you, it's the right thing to do, but make sure that you are not being reckless and that you've got a plan to meet your needs as well as you go forward. So it helps us release conventional, traditional approaches to spirituality and access our own deep inner well, allowing us to connect deeper with a higher power and divine feminine wisdom on the esoteric occult level, right? It gives us access to Akashic records, revolutionary spiritual technologies, but negatively we can just rebel spiritually without wisdom just being reckless, just to stand out without actually, doing the proper training or being open to the practice. We can access information that we're not ready to integrate, bypassing earthly lessons. A lot of the time, we can use spiritual concepts to ignore looking after our financial, physical, body needs or psychological and emotional needs, so we must not do that. So we can work with water. Water rituals do really well with this Sabin symbol, channeling ancient feminine wisdom in terms of how it influences our health. We can have breakthroughs in how we access and express deep feelings on the emotional level, speaking our emotional truth. Others can feel uncomfortable about this, but this is about standing firm in your truth whilst respecting other people's boundaries, but not people pleasing also. Spiritually, it can give us sudden access to spiritual teachings and practices that transform our path, and we can feel connected to lineages of wisdom keepers. It physically wants us to focus on staying hydrated and our vocal health, and how revolutionary change affects our physical body and nervous system. Psychologically, it wants us to integrate outside the wisdom and heal the wounds of being different. It's about radically accepting yourself. So, as I said, voice work and chanting can help you access ancient wisdom, as can, using water, maybe going to a local well or river to get natural water. We've got places like Glastonbury in the UK, looking after your spiritual practice and seeking wisdom from unconventional sources or teachers. But make sure, the end goal of seeking any teacher is they should be empowering you to make that one-to-one connection they say they have with the divine. We can all get that, eventually, if we work through our psychological, emotional and spiritual issues, learning to balance and trust ourselves, So we can do vocal exercises, humming and toning to strengthen our voice, throat chakra work, and it puts attention, this Sabin symbol, of using our vocal cords to say what needs to be spoken at this time, and it upgrades our spiritual understanding, allowing us access to deep wells of wisdom, and it wants us to release the need to follow other people and conventional spiritual paths and access our own direct line to ancient wisdom, So learning to trust your guidance from within and removing all barriers that stop you from doing that, And of course, it's easier said than done, because we can have mental health issues that stop us from trusting ourselves and stuff. So we have to learn to balance, and we have to learn to know ourselves so we know our capabilities as well. But we also need to tap into trusting ourselves as well. So Pluto's in the 8th degree of Capricorn. The Sabin symbol is birds in a house singing happily, and it rules the lymph vessels of the knee, and it reminds us of where transformation meets domestic bliss, and our immune system learns to protect happiness. So again, it adds to the transformative power of bringing joy and happiness and freedom into our day-to-day routine and our domestic spaces, whether it be our workplace or home, right? And it wants us to liberate within limitations. So yes, there's going to be limitations. Life will always be lifing, right? But it's about finding joy and happiness and wholeness in unexpected places and within those limitations, and allowing our wild nature to adapt to domestic spaces. Psychologically, the archetype of freedom and joy and happiness that can exist within any structure or routine or limitation if we're open to being like, why, this is my life, I'm just going to be happy regardless of what crap life throws at me, and finding the positive in it, but not in a way that bypass your emotions, So it allows us to use wild wisdom to adapt to practical life, but negatively it can, lead to the false domestication of our wild nature and joy and happiness that mask deeper pain, avoiding transformation by staying comfortable. So yes, be happy in your limitations, but don't ignore ignore your feelings, but try and build some happiness in while you do that shadow work, while you deal with the pain and suffering that may come from loss or grief or anything else you're going through, like heartbreak, rejection, or dealing with your childhood trauma. It teaches us to find genuine joy and happiness within life's challenging routines, systems and experiences. Right on the esoteric level, it brings the divine spark of happiness that can transform any environment and the shamanic power within our ordinary reality. But negatively, it can add to spiritual bypassing through false positivity. We can avoid shadow work by focusing only on light, and we have to not do that. So just listening to birds or working with birds, using songs, bird songs and music as transformative tools. Any music, it doesn't just have to be bird music, nature sounds, or any music you like, right? And allow yourself to bring wild wisdom into daily practice. In terms of your emotional health, it can allow for the deep transformation of our relationships, learning that happiness can coexist within life's challenges and pain. Spiritually, it's the integration of wild shamanic wisdom into routine spiritual practice, finding the sacred in the ordinary. In terms of our physical health, it wants us to focus on lymphatic drainage and immune system support, and pay attention to how happiness and music can affect physical healing. Psychologically, it wants us to heal the split between our wild authentic self and our socialized sort of like persona who we're told to be, and integrate our shadow through joy and happiness, and inner child work. So all kinds of rituals that involve singing and music, and full moon ceremonies, working with bird feathers and imagery in release rituals, transforming our living space into a sanctuary, using sound healing and music therapy, lymphatic massages around the knee area, gentle movement and dance to support the immune system, and reminding ourselves that, just like our lymph vessels filter out what doesn't serve our body, we have to do the same with our life experiences, allowing ourselves to protect our joy and happiness. So Pluto's transformative power allows us to increase our capacity for authentic happiness, and we need to release the belief that transformation has to be grim, and discovering that joy and happiness is our friend in deep change. And sometimes, healing is not all fun, it's not all ha ha he he, but sometimes being comfortable with the fact that it's not all ha ha he he can make us find balance and peace, right? So in terms of the karmic meaning, it wants us to think about the ways that we look after ourselves and nourish ourselves spiritually, and have more of an authentic communion relationship with the divine. And it wants us to learn to properly prepare sacred space for receiving spiritual gifts and sharing wisdom with others. We can be complete in cycles around spiritual materialism, the tendency to collect spiritual experiences without properly digesting their wisdom. The negative karma being released involves patterns of spiritual starvation, either giving all your energy away without receiving it back, or consuming spiritual teachings without implementing them, living them in your day-to-day life, So remember, I'm all about slow, consistent changes and building what into your day-to-day thoughts, habits and relationships, especially the relationship with yourself. In terms of past life memories that can come up, memories of you being a temple, like a priestess, wise woman or man or person, or a spiritual teacher who sacrificed their own needs for others' growth. And collectively, it's surfacing to reveal humanity's karma around sacred communion and authentic spiritual practice. We're releasing religious programming that separates the sacred from the everyday and learning to create genuine spiritual nourishment in our lives. So contracts coming to completion now involve agreements to learn proper spiritual boundaries and authentic self-care. And this full moon is happening now because humanity is ready to move beyond spiritual performance into genuine mystical communion. So in terms of, what we need to release at this full moon, we can release patterns of spiritual bypassing and false transcendence that keeps us from genuine intimacy with the divine, letting go of the belief that spiritual growth requires suffering or sacrifice of your basic human needs, releasing the tendency to either overgive spiritually or consume spiritual teachings without integration. In terms of shadow work, it puts a light on, illuminates our shadows around spiritual pride, being a victim, martyrdom, and the ways we may use spiritual practices to avoid emotional intimacy with ourselves and others. So we need to examine where we perform spirituality rather than live it authentically. In terms of forgiveness and healing practices, forgive yourself for the times when you've used spiritual practices to avoid reality, and forgive others who have done the same. Practice compassion for the parts of yourself that have sought transcendence as an escape rather than integration. And in terms of, completion and harvest rituals, because this is the full hunter's moon after all, create a sacred meal ceremony where you literally and figuratively digest the spiritual lessons of the past year. Set a beautiful table with intention, blessing each element, as representing the wisdom you've gained. Then eat mindfully as a form of communion with your higher self. So, the water element, the earth element, the fire element, and the air element, having things that represent these and honoring them, as well as the higher power you believe in. Now, in terms of how this super full hunter's moon affects your relationships, it helps you release inherited patterns around emotional nourishment and spiritual expression within family systems. Expect a deeper, more honest conversations about spiritual beliefs and practices. Friendships, the full moon energy reveals which friendships offer genuine spiritual support versus those based on shared spiritual materialism or fantasy. It's time to release connections that enable spiritual bypassing. In terms of romantic partnerships, it allows deep emotional and spiritual intimacy, and this becomes possible as both partners release the need to perform spiritually, and it opens us up to a more authentic, mystical connection together. In terms of dating and new connections, it attracts soul-level connections with people who share your genuine spiritual path rather than just surface spiritual interests. In terms of your own relationship with yourself, if you're self-partnered, it's a perfect time for deep self-forgiveness and releasing the inner critic that judges your spiritual progress. Be open to your humanity as part of your divinity. In terms of professional relationships, workplace dynamics may reveal where you give away your spiritual energy inappropriately, or where authentic spiritual values can be integrated into your professional life. In terms of your career development, let go of work that drains your soul or requires you to compromise your spiritual values. This full moon supports transitioning toward work that feels like spiritual service. In terms of your personal growth, release the pressure to be growing and evolving spiritually constantly. Sometimes the most profound next level growth happens through simply being present with what is. In terms of your spiritual awakening, it completes cycles of seeking external spiritual validation and supports turning towards your own direct connection with the divine. In terms of your educational plans, it's time to release learning that feeds the ego rather than your soul. Focus on wisdom traditions that support practical spiritual living. In terms of your creative expression, release creative blocks by being open to the mystical muse and allow your art to become form of spiritual practice and service. So in terms of the best full moon activities by your lifestyle, if you're more creative, channel the Piscean inspiration through watercolor painting, music creation or poetry writing as forms of release and spiritual communion. Professionals create a sacred space in your work environment and practice conscious completion of projects as a spiritual ritual. Entrepreneurs release business strategies based on spiritual materialism and align your offerings with genuine service to others' spiritual growth. Healers examine your boundaries around spiritual giving and receiving. Practice healing work that nurtures you as much as your clients. Spiritual seekers move beyond seeking into being. Practice simple presence and communion with everyday sacred movements and moments. Families create family rituals around gratitude, forgiveness and celebrating each member's spiritual uniqueness and journey. In terms of questions that can help you focus on different areas of your life at the time of this full moon. In terms of your financial life, how do I relate to money as a spiritual energy, and what beliefs about abundance am I ready to release? This question confronts the Piscean tendency to either spiritualize money away or create financial martyrdom, victimhood. You can ask yourself, what patterns around financial sacrifice in the name of spirituality am I ready to transform? This explores how spiritual beliefs might create unhealthy financial relationships. In terms of your emotional patterns, you can ask, what emotional patterns do I use to avoid genuine spiritual intimacy with myself and others? This confronts emotional bypassing and false transcendence. You can ask, how can I create genuine emotional nurturing rather than spiritual comfort food? And this explores authentic versus superficial emotional care. In terms of your spiritual growth, you can ask, what aspects of my spiritual practice have become performance without genuine communion, connection with the higher power or your higher self? And this examines the spiritual ego and authenticity. You can ask yourself, how can I create long-term spiritual practices that nurture rather than drain my life force? And this confronts, spiritual overwhelm and long-term practices. So in terms of guidance for each of the 12 sun, moon and rising signs at the time of this full super hunter's moon in Pisces, Aries release the need to lead every spiritual group or experience. Practice, receptive mysticism, two-way mysticism, and allow others to guide you sometimes. Taurus, let go of rigid, inflexible spiritual routines that have become more about comfort than growth. Be open to fluid, flexible, intuitive spiritual practices. Gemini, release the tendency to intellectualize spiritual experiences rather than feeling them. Practice silent communion and emotional integration. Cancer, this energy deeply supports your intuitive nature. Release fears about your psychic sensitivity being too much. For others, Leo, let go of spiritual performance and be open to humble, private spiritual practice that doesn't require audience or recognition. Virgo, release perfectionist expectations about spiritual practice. Be open to the messy, imperfect, beautifully human aspects of spiritual growth. Libra, balance giving and receiving in your spiritual relationships. Release the pattern of being everyone's spiritual support without, them giving back, and be there for yourself. Scorpio, the deep water energy supports your natural mystical abilities. Release fear of your own spiritual power and be open to your gifts. Sagittarius, let go of spiritual dogma and be open to direct personal mystical experience. Trust your own spiritual adventures and insights. Capricorn, release the need to achieve or accomplish in spiritual practice. Be open to being rather than doing as a spiritual practice. practice. Aquarius, balance your revolutionary spiritual insights with compassionate community building. Release spiritual elitism or isolation. Pisces, this is your, full moon in your sign. This is the time for deep release and spiritual renewal. Trust your intuitive guidance and be open to your mystical nature fully. So all in all, this full moon is all about healing, being artistic and creative, and genuine spiritual communion connection. It's the perfect supermoon for forgiveness work, ancestor generational dysfunction healing, and releasing patterns that no longer serve your soul's growth. Avoid making major decisions while your emotions are intense, and be careful not to lose yourself in fantasy or spiritual bypassing. The challenge is staying grounded while accessing such deep mystical energy. In terms of, financially, release limiting beliefs about money and spirituality through water-based abundance rituals. Practice gratitude for resources while releasing any shame around having material needs as a spiritual person. In terms of relationship work, deep forgiveness patterns for past relationships, especially those involving spiritual manipulation or codependency. This energy supports releasing patterns of spiritual victimhood in relationships. In terms of health and wellness, focus on lymphatic drainage, staying hydrated and supporting your nervous system during this emotionally intense full moon. Practice gentle movement and avoid overwhelming your sensitive system. In terms of spiritual development, perfect time for dream work, past life meditation and accessing psychic abilities. Use water-based meditation practices and create a sacred space for deep communion with your guides. Use creativity to express yourself as a spiritual practice, allowing the mystical Piscean energy to guide you. Complete creative projects that have been in development, especially those around spiritual or healing in general, and it's wants you to complete spiritual and emotional cycles that have been building throughout the years. It's a very letting go ending. Pisces, 12th house, the last house in the astrology chart, right? And we're being invited to face our secrets, to let go of them, to think about the ways that we undo ourselves. The 12th house in astrology is all about self-undoing, right? Our self-destructive habits, whether it be over doing drugs, alcohol, Netflix and chilling, and anything else that stops us from being who we truly are. Reflect on the wisdom that you've gathered throughout your journey. That's what the sacred table in Sabian degree is all about. You're being invited to nurture yourself, and the key themes of this super full hunter's moon is all about spiritual connection, proper energetic and other boundaries, and the integration of mystical insights into practical daily life. And the manifestation opportunities are really, quite big. This is your chance to release patterns of spiritual starvation, doing too much for others and not enough for yourself, or not feeding your spiritual needs at all, and step into long-term practices that truly feed your soul. And with the moon moving into Aries later on today, right, you have the fire to implement whatever insights come up from this deep Piscean release work. So trust the process, set your sacred table with intention, and allow yourself to be nurtured by the deep next level wisdom that this full hunter's moon in Pisces brings. And the hunters of old knew that successful hunting required both patience and precision, focus. Apply that same wisdom to hunting down and releasing what no longer serves your highest good. So that's the end of this very long depth analysis of the super full hunter's moon in Pisces, right? That happens on the 7th of October. So take care. I'm Amani, your holistic astrological karmic life coach. Look after yourself now, and see you next time.